Suffering, it's this thing that connects every single one of us, right? It's the one experience we all share. And yet, it's the one thing we spend so much of our lives running away from. We feel it, we try to ignore it, but what if we're looking at it all wrong? What if, buried inside all that pain, there's actually an invitation? That's what we're going to get into today. This really fundamental and, often misunderstood part of being human.
So that really brings us to the core question of this whole explainer. Why does it even exist? Is suffering just random? Is it just meaningless static that we have to put up with? Or is there something more to it? A signal in the noise? Could it be that the very thing we're trying to escape is actually trying to tell us something important?
And let's be real, pain isn't some abstract concept. It shows up in our lives in very, very real ways. I'm talking about the grief that hits you when you lose someone, that tight feeling in your chest from anxiety, the deep, deep ache of loneliness, or that just hollow feeling when you wonder what the point of it all is. These are the things that connect us, It's our shared humanity right there.
All right, so let's get into it. To really understand this, we're going to need to look at it from a few different angles. We're going to tap into some ancient wisdom, ideas that have been around for thousands of years, and we're also going to look at what modern science is telling us about how our minds and our brains actually work.
You know what's really fascinating? Pretty much every major spiritual tradition on Earth starts from the exact same place. They all acknowledge that, life involves suffering, but how they interpret it, that's where things get interesting. For Buddhists, it's all about attachment and craving. For Hindus, it's like we've forgotten who we really are. In Christianity, it can find meaning through love and sacrifice. And in Sufism, it's seen as this fire that burns away the ego. See the pattern here? The goal is almost never to get rid of pain entirely, but to figure out how to relate to it in a wiser way.
And this idea right here, it just captures that spiritual viewpoint so perfectly. The idea that suffering isn't some kind of punishment. It's a shaping process. It's the idea that when we face hardship with awareness, it's like a tool that can carve away all our rough edges. And what's left behind is something stronger, something deeper, and way more compassionate.
Okay, this next thought is such a great bridge from that ancient wisdom to modern psychology. It makes a really, really important distinction. See, pain, that's inevitable. It's the raw feeling of a broken bone or a broken heart. That's just part of being alive. But suffering, well, that's different. Suffering is the story our mind creates about the pain. And here's the kicker. That story, that's something we can actually change.
So how does the mind do that? How does it take a moment of pain and turn it into weeks, months, or even years of suffering? Well, it usually comes down to a few key mental patterns. First, we fight reality. We just refuse to accept what's happening. Then, we get stuck in these loops, right? Either replaying the past over and over or spinning out these scary stories about the future. And maybe the biggest one of all, we start to think that we are our painful thoughts. But here's the thing to remember. These are just mental habits. They feel real, but they're not permanent facts about who you are.
And it turns out, this mental habit has a really deep root in our biology. If you look at it from a brain science perspective, you have to accept a simple, kind of tough truth. Our brains were not built for happiness. They're survival machines. They're hardwired to be constantly on the lookout for danger, for what could go wrong. So if you do that, it's not a personal flaw. It's literally a feature of the system, not a bug.
So this survival instinct can create what you might call a suffering loop. You've got the amygdala, which is like the brain's smoke detector, and it can get stuck in the on position. If you've been through trauma, that can actually change the wiring of your brain, making you see threats where there aren't any. And all of this keeps your nervous system totally jacked up in survival mode. But, and this is so important, it's not a life sentence. Our brains can be rewired. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. We're going to look at this from a metaphysical angle. What that means is we're going beyond just the physical brain, and we're going to talk about the nature of consciousness itself. This is all about learning to tell the difference between the storm, all our thoughts and feelings and experiences, and the quiet, steady part of you that's just watching it all happen.
From this perspective, a huge amount of our suffering comes down to a simple case of mistaken identity. It's like we mistake the movie screen for the movie that's playing on it. We confuse that calm, ever-present observer inside, our core awareness, with the temporary experiences that are just passing through. We get lost in the story and think, I am angry, or I am sad. But really, we're the space, the screen, where all those feelings just come and go.
I absolutely love this next metaphor. Just think about it for a second. Dark, stormy clouds can completely cover the sky, right? But they don't actually stain the sky. They don't leave a permanent mark. The sky itself is always there, pure and vast and untouched. And that's the whole idea here. Your thoughts and emotions, they're just the weather. But your core awareness, that's the sky. And this all points to a really profound principle. Whatever you put your attention on grows. Now hold on, this is not about positive thinking making all your problems disappear. It's much more subtle than that. It just means that whatever you consistently focus on becomes more intense in your experience. So by consciously shifting your attention, maybe just to your breath or the feeling of your feet on the floor, you can create a tiny bit of space around the pain. And in that little gap, that's where you find your power of choice.
Okay, so we've talked about spirituality, psychology, brain science. So what? What's the actual payoff for understanding all this? Well, this last section is all about the practical, real-world changes that happen when we start to shift our relationship with suffering. For one, when you stop fighting reality all the time, you suddenly have so much more energy. It's amazing. And when you just let feelings be there without judging them or trying to push them away, you find they move through you a lot faster. That's how you build resilience. And when you really get to know your own suffering, you can't help but feel a deeper compassion for everyone else because you see it in them too. Suddenly, pain isn't a prison anymore. It's more like a teacher.
And these aren't just nice ideas. They're things you can actively practice. We're talking about things like mindfully watching your thoughts without getting hooked by them, or asking powerful questions like, who is it that's aware of this feeling? Simple things too, like using your breath to calm down your nervous system. And finally, taking what you learned from your own healing and using it to help others.
So when you boil it all down, our journey with pain really comes down to this one fundamental choice. There are two paths. The first is unconscious suffering. That's when we're just reacting, blaming, resisting, and when we do that, we just make it worse. We multiply it for ourselves and everyone around us. But the second path is conscious suffering. That's when we learn to meet our pain with awareness, with curiosity, maybe even with a little bit of kindness. And when we do that, that's when it has the power to completely transform us.
Now, what does that transformation look like? Where does it lead? It leads to this: wisdom, compassion, freedom. These are the gifts that are so often hidden inside our biggest challenges. The wisdom to really navigate life, the compassion to connect with others, and finally, the freedom from being a prisoner of our own pain.
So I want to leave you with one final question to just sit with. We spend so much energy trying to outrun our pain, don't we? But what if we just stopped? What if for just a moment we turned around and faced it with courage and with curiosity? When we finally stop running from our suffering, what do you think might finally have the space to appear in our lives?